Hi, everybody. Welcome to Half and Half this morning. Today for class, um, I was thinking about a couple questions that have come in over the past couple weeks, and they've centered around head, neck, and shoulders. And one question that comes up, I think, for maybe all of us when we do Pilates is, what do I do with my neck in the 100? And am I doing that right? How do I work with that? How should that feel? Um, and I say for all of us because I think it's sort of an evolving uh, placement. We often think of the right posture as being static, um, but anything that changes from the ground up, or things do change from the ground up, right? Like if I make an adjustment in my pelvis, then my ribs need to adjust, then my neck needs to adjust, then my head needs to adjust. So the head is the last piece. And so sometimes with all those back and forth counterbalances, it's about the nuance of understanding what feels like the right place, but not necessarily finding the right place and holding it forever. So that is complicated to start with. And then the shoulders are really related to that, and the rib cage is really related to that, and that relationship. So one thing I will often say when I talk about the head and neck is that the head isn't connected to anything else. So the rib cage, you have a reference point above and below in your body that gives you feedback. Your neck and your pelvis or lower back will give you feedback about where your rib cage is. But your head doesn't have feedback above. So my neck will give me feedback, but I don't get the other set of feedback there. So it also is difficult for that reason to figure out where to be. So let's take a look at it. Maybe you've done this kind of thing with me before, but I think it's always useful to review and think about. So one thing that happens a lot for people's heads is they're forward. So the head for all of us, we just tend to be in this forward head position. And you might imagine why, like especially if you're sitting, typing at a computer, maybe looking down at your phone, maybe even driving, cooking, just so many things could put us in this like head forward position. And then we know that's not so great. We start to feel that in our neck, and we definitely feel it in our shoulders. I think we're all really aware of our shoulders being pulled forward in that position. So we often fix it from the shoulders and a little bit from the back. And we take the chest and we lift the chest way up and we think, okay, that's better. And it probably is, because now my head is more centered over my pelvis, so it is a little better. But I'm still really, when it comes down to it, I haven't changed my neck much at all. I've moved my rib cage, but I haven't really changed the difference between here and here. So it's not the best solution. And then the other thing that happens is then the shoulders get pulled way back, and that becomes sort of part of the posture. And, we might even imagine this is a really strong posture. I feel like we have been taught in many ways this is a strong posture and where we want to be, but our body sort of disagrees with that. So if I kind of start over and get the rib cage back in place and let the shoulders just relax, then what has to happen with the head is it has to slide up and back without necessarily moving the rib cage and get back in line over the chest, which is really tricky. So sometimes what happens instead is we kind of do this. That's not really it, right? So to get that feeling of sliding backwards, I've sometimes heard the image of like a drawer, sliding a drawer back into place, right? You don't move the frame of the drawer, but you let the head or you let the drawer slide in. So maybe you're, following along with me and doing this. That'd be great if you want to, or maybe you're watching if that's more informative for you. But feeling a little bit of that, like what is that place? And what's the difference between that movement and this movement? And a lot of times it's a little bit of a combination of both, like as we're trying to figure it out. So then there's this other question of like, okay, well, there is this tightness. So once my head does come back in place, I do need to kind of recheck in with my chest. Oh, okay, where's my chest? It's kind of lifted. This lower rib thing we do in Pilates a lot, we could draw that in a little more and drop. So I'm creating more space between my ears and my collarbones by drawing my ribs together and letting my chest drop and letting my head float back. And then my shoulders, my shoulder blades, They just get to move around however they want to. They're not being pushed and pulled in these different ways. Okay, so what do we do with that? That is a great question. I'm not sure I'm sure. So let's play with that movement lying on your back. So if you're here, your feet are on the floor, your knees are bent, your head's down. I think the thing we have practiced a lot in Pilates is the rib connection for all of us. So don't worry about the head for a moment. Just let everything be relaxed. Don't worry about your pelvis that much. Just find a pretty relaxed place. And then take your hands on the lower part of your rib cage. And as you inhale, think of the breath moving sideways through the ribs. And as you exhale, think of drawing the ribs together. And as the ribs come together in the front, they also go down towards the mat. So practice that a few times. See if you can feel that. And maybe if you've done this before, or maybe you're just starting to notice that it helps to let your chest relax too. So like I was showing a moment ago, standing, if my ribs are pulled up, it shortens the distance between my ears and my collarbones, or my chin and my chest. And one thing I can do is pull the rib cage back into place, and then see if you can feel that the chest could also drop, and the front of the neck might have a little bit of length. And then after you've done that, do just a slight check-in with the shoulders. Don't have to move them or shift them, but just notice, do your shoulder blades feel wide on your back? Do they feel kind of pinched in your back? We'd hope for that wider feeling. You might even be able to breathe into that space in between your shoulder blades. And so then adding on that one last piece, which is that as you exhale, ribs together, chest drops down, neck has a little more space. Could you imagine the back of your head heavy? That your head gets a little heavier, a little more grounded as all this happens in the chest and the ribs. We just keep the head really dropping. And maybe you feel a tiny bit of that movement I was showing standing, of drawing the head slightly back or towards the back of the body, which would in this position feel like letting it drop into the floor a little more, or maybe even slightly pressing into the floor. And all of these things work most easily on the exhale. So really paying attention on your exhale. Ribs together, chest drops, head sinks. And you might be noticing 2 out of 3 things working for you. That's not uncommon. You get the ribs, you get the chest, but your head pulls. Or you get your chest in your head, but your ribs keep pulling up. So certainly the goal is 3 out of 3. But it may take some practice to get to 3 out of 3. And the first step is just noticing. Like, oh yeah, that does happen. Those things are connected. When I drop my head and relax my chest, huh, my ribs come up, or some variation of that. Once you notice it, then you know what you're working with, right? And then you can just start little changes, little by little. Now, let's reinforce it a little bit. I think arms up to the ceiling actually is going to be the easiest place to reinforce what we're doing here. So let's go arms up to the ceiling, palms facing in. It helps me keep my shoulder blades pretty wide. I think it's a little easier to feel my ribs drop, and then my head really heavy. So now we're going to check in with the pelvis. We're going to do some knee folds, practicing this upper body awareness and perhaps alignment. So inhale, one leg floats up. Exhale, leg floats down. Inhale, left leg floats up. Exhale, down. So don't get too concerned about the legs. The legs are just a little bit of novelty. So we can practice the upper body position. So they float up and down. Hopefully it feels kind of simple. Some of you have done this movement just so many times in Pilates classes. And that's on purpose. So you can keep your attention on this other stuff. Ribs, chest, head, shoulder blades. Now, if you want just a little more challenge, you could add your opposite arm floating back a little bit as one leg floats up and then back to the ceiling. If you don't want a little more challenge, don't do that. Just stay with the legs. Or you could switch to just one arm moving back. And let's try a couple more. And even out. Right side, left side for yourself. And then take your arms down to the mat. So we're going to try something that I actually think is very challenging, but is often called a modification or thought of as a more basic way to do something. More basic is sometimes more challenging. And that's doing the 100 with your head on the mat. And part of the reason I think that's so challenging is when your head's on the mat, it's a little harder to feel your upper abdominals. You have to really focus on it. Maybe you've noticed that, to keep thinking about drawing the ribs together. When your head comes up, a lot of times it's a little easier to think about this right here, more possible for many of us to think about this work right here. Even though it's hard on your neck, it's easier to access this right here. So we're going to try this challenging work of keeping the head down in the 100, but all this, right? Chest soft, ribs in, head heavy, arms a little off the floor. And we're going to go one leg off. Find that 100 feeling in your abdominals. Take the second leg off and legs together. Now you might notice your neck is tensing up even though your head's on the floor. So there's a good challenge. Can you still keep your head heavy and your neck out of it and access your abdominals? And let's try a little bit of pumping the arms. Inhaling, exhaling. Inhale and exhale. Breathing in. If it still feels like, oh, I'm having a hard time, you could just breathe in and keep the arms still. That's a lot of work too. And then lowering your arms and lowering your legs. So when you do that well with that kind of focus, you get maybe the same amount of work. I was getting a lot of work in my abdominals doing that way, and some kind of different work in my arms and shoulders. So it can be really useful, I think, just to vary your practice. I've done Pilates for 25 years, maybe, or something like that. And I still find doing slightly different things sometimes brings more work because it's like, oh, yeah, I don't usually do it like that. I have new stuff to think about. But let's see, maybe not but, and let's see what it's like to get your head off the floor. How do we do that position? Because that is something that is useful that we want to think about. So we've got one strategy for the 100, just practiced it there. Now let's look at bringing the head off the floor. So a couple weeks ago, we did a class where I was moving the shoulder blades around, talking about the shoulder blades, talking about the shoulder joint and the difference of that. Maybe you were in that class, maybe you remember it. So I'm going to go back to some of those ideas here. So when I put my hands behind my head, I generally bring my elbows a little bit forward. And that has to do with my shoulder blades, and it has to do with my head. So when my elbows go back, the farther they go back, just naturally my shoulder blades are going to come together. You can try this right here with me. So shoulder blades come together as the elbows go back. Feel what that's like. Shoulder blades come apart as the arms go forward. And find the edge back and forth. How far do your elbows go back, moving the shoulder blades? When is the moment your shoulder blades stop moving? It's probably some diagonal amount with the elbow. If I could go all the way forward, but my shoulder blades stop moving within this range. So play with that a couple times. Elbows way back, shoulder blades way back. Elbows a little forward, shoulder blades wide. Now I'm doing that in a very isolated way. I'm just moving my shoulder blades. That's not what we usually do when we start this movement. What we usually do is we emphasize more motion by one. As the shoulder blades go back and I hit my end range, I start pulling my head forward. And then my elbows feel like they can go farther back, but I've gotten into this head forward position. And then I generally get stuck there, right? So we know we're not really interested in that. So that's one thing that happens. Another thing that happens is my chest lifts way up as my head goes forward, my elbows go way back. So a lot of us learned keep your elbows super wide and your hands really light to do a crunch, right? This position, and your head straight up to the ceiling. I feel like this was the 80s. This was talked about a lot. The elbows all the way flat, the head floats up, and I'm getting my abdominals this way. And I am getting my abdominals working this way. But this is the exact position I was showing right here, sitting up. So what happens when the elbows come a little forward? The head floats back, the chest drops in, all the space between my chin and my chest. This is the position we often teach in Pilates, and this is why. So let's look at that position there. I'm going to start with my elbows flat. I'm going to bring them up a little to feel my diagonal. As I do that, I'm going to think what we did a moment ago. Heavy head, easy chest, ribs together. And then as you come up, pay attention to your shoulders, chest, and head relationship. So sometimes the higher your head goes, the more it starts pulling forward, the more the elbows get left behind. You're going to feel more in your neck there. So once you're up, find your elbows. Think of your head really supported by your hands, still in that kind of heavy feeling. Still some space between your chin and your chest. Lower your head back down. Play with it a couple times. Exhaling, nice heavy head, elbows keep coming forward, ribs draw together, space between your chin and your chest. Coming back down. And a couple more. I'm doing a big long exhale. That really helps me get my ribs and my chest. And then relax. Relax with your head on the floor again. I'm just going to sit up so I can clear my throat, but relax with your head on the floor. See if you can feel all that same work again. Nice, easy, or non-work. Easy chest, a little bit of ribs heavy, and head heavy. How's that feel? Moving through the body. Okay, so we're going to try coming up into that place, finding it again. I'm going to do version 2 of the 100. I'm going to keep my right hand behind my head really powerfully, reach my left arm forward. And then I'm going to recheck everything. My head supported by my hands, my belly in, my chest soft, space between my chin and my chest. I'm leaving my feet down for this one. I think it just makes things clearer. Pumping the left arm. Inhale. Exhale. And you would think using your arm to hold your head would make your abdominals work less, but that's not necessarily true. Mine are working super hard. I'm going to take the left hand, really hold, take the right arm. And I actually feel my tricep working on my left elbow, left arm, holding my head. And I really feel the ribs. And then come back down. Same thing, do a little check-in. I had a little neck work there, but it wasn't painful, achy neck work. It was like, nice, strong feeling that now gets to relax. So that's another thing. Sometimes the right work is good. And then bring yourself up to sitting. I bet you didn't think we were going to spend the whole time on the 100, but we are. So we have one more way to think about getting into the 100. And that's going to be starting from upright. And some people really find this is a much easier way to find this position. Now, just watch the first time as I go down so I can give you a little more information about what might happen. So as I go down, sometimes what happens is the head doesn't go with me. And I get really, really pulled forward in my head and really drop down in my shoulder blades. And of course, this is not so great in my neck. It doesn't feel good in my neck, doesn't feel good in my belly. And it's really a head forward position, right? It's not the position we were just practicing with all this space through here. So as I go down, I'm going to think about that. Even though my hands aren't behind my head, I'm going to think of that little bit of floating back, ribs in, chest in, floating back in the head, ribs in, chest in, wide shoulder blades. And find your version of the 100 position. You might stay a little more up. This is not technically the 100, but maybe you're going to do that because that just feels like the right place for you. You might come all the way towards that 100 place. And then again, you could keep holding with one hand. I'm going to try both hands. You can decide feet down or up. I'm going to try feet up. Little pumps. And if you start to lose it, you can put your hands on your legs. Find it again. Keep going. 5 inhale. 5 exhale. Two more times. And then everything back down. And come up to sitting. So I feel like I go over my time a lot with Scott. And poor Scott has to just teach a little less. So let's see where he's going to go with all this. And in general, just some options for the 100. Any of those are useful when we go into the 100 in class or when you practice on your own. And really like, wow, I felt a lot of work through my ribs and abdominals. And so that's what you're going for. Maybe you did today, maybe you didn't, but that's going to be the goal. Is it's possible to really get this to come on, this to do a little less. It's always going to work some, but it could maybe do a little less. So let me do a little pass off to the very tall Anderson.
All right, so those instructions are really revolutionary to me as a longtime yoga practitioner. I'd always heard lift the ribs. And as someone who was head forward and shoulders rounded forward, whenever I heard lift the ribs, and my teacher's really clear lift up here, I had no idea how to do that. So what I ended up doing is jutting those lower ribs way forward and thought I was a very good, obedient student, which I may have been, but boy, did my back hurt in time. So as Colette pointed out, not only did I not have any real shift or change in my head and chest relationship, but I also created a lot of back pain. And so I was really kind of perplexed at first. How am I going to improve my posture with flexion through the 100? But sure enough, I really did. So what a wonderful beginning we've had. And so now to take these ideas into standing. So as we typically do in my approach to movement, and Colette and I jointly, is to feel your feet on the floor, grounding energy down. And let that grounding energy then be the support to lightly lift your pelvic crest up. And by lightly, I'm speaking of just a fraction of an inch, no more than a quarter inch. So maybe you feel that lightly engages your belly. So we have a foundation now. Now, built upon the foundation, is let your head and your shoulders round a little bit forward to knit your ribs, just like you did in those variations of the 100. And then keep your lower ribs connected to your belly as you bring your head up. Now, Colette showed us how a number of people, when they do that, it's their chin that lifts up. So I often will cue lift the back of your head up to create that sense of lengthening of the sternum. Then the shoulders, a little bit up, a little bit back, tiniest bit down. And let's take some deeper breaths. Inhale through your nose. Exhale out your mouth. Inhale nose. Exhale mouth. All right, so we're going to take that same breathing and now add in some movement. So just like you did on your back, bring your arms straight ahead in front of you. Now for a lot of us, I'm including myself, just this movement right here, lower ribs tend to push forward. So keeping them knit, connected, back of your head held high. Then keeping all that true in your torso as you slowly raise your arms up, up, up. Now right about here, if you're anything like me, your lower ribs are already tending to push forward. We'll hold here for a few breaths. And then slowly lowering your arms down. Now we'll take a moment here, everything we've worked on thus far, ribs, head, shoulders. We'll take a moment for you to apply those cues. Now take your little fingers and lead with your little fingers to come part way up. And then right about here, notice how your arms naturally rotate to come the rest of the way up. Same knitting the ribs, same holding your head high, and then releasing your arms down. So now we're going to make our way to the floor, to hands and knees. Exhale, arms to the side up, ribs stay knit, chin lifts up. Inhale, fold. Exhale, gorilla. That's where the excuse me, crown of your head extends forward. And then inhale, stepping your feet back. And here's downward facing dog position. So right in between the shoulder blades. Direct the inhale right into that space. Open that space with your inhale. And then exhale, coming down to your knees. So then putting your spine into flexion. The yoga pose, cat pose. That's where your lower back arches up toward the ceiling, upper back arches up toward the ceiling. Even your neck arches up toward the ceiling. So a good question came in, where's the gaze? In cat pose, gaze right into your belly. And in cat pose, maybe you already noticed, automatically your lower ribs are knit with your belly. So best you can, keeping that knitting, it's going to be some engagement of your belly as you go from spine flexion to spine neutral. And keeping your ribs knit, just like we did in standing, reach the crown of your head forward. And then keeping that knitting and that length in your neck as you move into spine extension to look more forward. And in time of practice, most of this movement occurs between the shoulder blades. As you can see in me in the side view, that's still a work in progress. That's aspiration. We'll take a few more breaths here. Then from spine extension back to spine neutral. And from spine neutral, hands and knees, toes turning under, back to downward dog. And we'll take a few breaths here. Gorilla, exhale, stepping forward. Inhale, folding. Exhale, rolling all the way up. Inhale, arms down. So those who've done a lot of yoga, we're going to do a movement you've maybe done hundreds, if not thousands of times, with all these elements baked right in. Lower belly, keeping your lower ribs knit as you lift up. Then, see if you can keep those lower ribs knit. As you exhale, take your arms up. And then this is going to be a lot like you did in cow pose. Long neck. As you float your chin up, thoracic extension. Then from extension, inhale to flexion. This is like cow pose to cat pose. We'll pause here for a bit. So this is spine position, more or less cat pose, spine flexion. Then neck long, ribs knit. Exhale to gorilla. This is more or less cow pose. We'll hold in gorilla for a few breaths. Then inhale from gorilla back to folding. Exhale, spine flexion. Gives way to spine extension. Inhale, arms down. So let's do that a few times. Exhale, arms to the side up. Neck long, ribs knit. Good for the upper back. Inhale, folding. Basically cat pose. Exhale, extension, gorilla pose, which is basically cow. Inhale, folding, basically cat. Exhale all the way up. Inhale, arms down. Let's do the same thing together quietly. Now moving into dog pose in a variation. Exhale, arms up, spine extension. Inhale, folding, flexion. Exhale, gorilla, spine extension. Inhale, dog pose. 9 times out of 10, I'll teach dog pose letting head hang. But there can be a time and a place to work in dog pose with extension. So it's all the same elements. Start by knitting your ribs, engaging your belly to do so. Then keeping your ribs knit as you reach the crown of your head toward your thumbs. So there's that imagery of long neck. Now keeping your ribs knit and your neck long, with the next exhale, thoracic extension to take your gaze progressively forward. What I like to call alternate upward facing dog pose. Couple breaths here. And then with the next exhale, let your head down, back to standard usual dog pose. Exhale, gorilla. Inhale, folding. Exhale all the way up. Inhale, arms down. Same thing a little bit faster. Exhale up. Extension. Inhale, folding. Flexion. Exhale, gorilla, extension. Inhale, dog pose, flexion if anything. Exhale, alternate upward dog. Now we're going into extension. Inhale, head down dog. Exhale, gorilla. Inhale, folding. Exhale all the way up. Inhale, arms down. So let's build on that idea. Taking your left foot and stepping it back quite a ways, but a little bit different than what we typically do. Have the back foot a little bit turned out so the back foot can comfortably rest on the floor. Heel on the floor, ball of the foot on the floor, toes on the floor. So that means you're no longer squarely facing forward. So bring your pelvis forward until you just bump into some resistance far enough. Then to whatever extent you swiveled your pelvis forward, keep it there as you bend your front knee. Now with your front knee bent, bring your hands into prayer position. And we're going to take a few breaths here quietly. So everything you know about posture that we did in standing, apply it here. All right, remember those sun salutations we did previously? Everything you knew from them applies here. Sweep your arms out to the side. Let your chin float up. Steady breathing. And then bring your hands down and stepping that back foot forward. We'll take a few breaths here. We've done something on one side, not yet the other side. And exploring, do the two sides feel the same? If not, do they feel different? So that's in the interest of feeling your body, embodying, to help calm your mind. So now then the other side, take your right foot, step it quite a ways back. Foot a little bit turned out so that your back foot, right foot, can comfortably rest on the floor. Whole foot, toes, ball of the foot, heel. Then because of the bony structure of the hip socket, it's ill-advised to square your hips forward, even if a very charismatic teacher has said to do so. Bring your pelvis around until you just bump into a little bit of tightness. Far enough. Now with the next out breath, bending your front knee. Bring your hands then into prayer position. Pelvic crest lift. Ribs knit. Lift up through the crown of your head. And with the exhale, arms up, chin up, like you were doing a sun salutation. And now we're in spine extension. And bring your hands back down. And step your back foot forward. So maybe you're feeling how that can open up the fronts of the hips. That can facilitate lifting your pelvic crest. That can facilitate standing a little bit taller. And we'll take a few deep breaths right here. So now we're going to make our way all the way down to the floor onto your bellies. So with the exhale, sweep your arms to the side up. Inhale, fold. Exhale, gorilla. Inhale, dog. And then with the next out breath, coming down to your knees and then all the way down to your belly. So on your belly, touch your heels. And that's going to necessitate at least some extent of external rotation in your legs. Then as you touch your heels, stretch back through your toes, reach your toes away from your back ribs. And then at the same time, reach forward to the crown of your head. Remember how we explored lengthening your neck. All the while knitting your ribs. Now keeping that knit of your ribs, with the next out breath, lift your straight legs a 1/4 inch up. Hardly at all. Just enough to engage your hamstrings, just enough to engage some of the butt muscles. Now, just like we did in gorilla, like we did in cow, like we did in portions of the sun salutation. With the next exhale, creating thoracic extension. So you look a little bit forward. And if you want more challenge, float your hands up, reach them back. And this right here is locust pose. We'll take a few breaths here. And then come on back down to your belly, hands next to your ribs. To help build upper body strength, push up to your hands and knees. And then up on your hands and knees, turn your toes under and move back to downward dog. And we'll take a few breaths here. And then coming down to your knees and into cross legs. When my kids were in preschool and kindergarten, they called this crisscross applesauce. Now, because of tightness in the hips, most of us, if not almost all of us, are a little bit back on the sitting bones. So to your capacity, roll forward toward the front edge of your sitting bones. Now, if you're anything like me, if I then think about sitting up tall, those lower ribs end up somewhere 10 feet in front of me. So everything we've worked on in supine and in standing also applies here. Keep your lower ribs connected. Lift up through the crown of your head. I think Colette gave us the best shoulder instruction there is. Loose and relaxed. Shoulders are tricky to work with. Sometimes incorrect shoulder position tenses the neck. Positioning the shoulders relieves the neck for a short period of time, weeks or months. And then the continued effort to align the shoulders causes future neck tension. When in doubt with your shoulders, relax. All right. So now we're going to continue working on mobilizing the spine, this time through rotation. So starting to turn to the right with your skull, and then what I call trickle down twist, segment twists, next neck segment down twists, next neck segment down twists, until you've rotated all 7 cervical vertebrae, and then all 12 thoracic vertebrae. Left hand comes across, right hand behind. And now everything we practice in posture applies right here. We'll take a minute quietly to put those ideas into practice. And then coming back toward the middle. And now the second side, trickle down twist, starts with the skull, then cervical 1, 2, through to cervical 7, and thoracic 1, sequentially down all the way down to T12. Right hand comes across, left hand behind. So I find using the breathing to align my spine very helpful. So using the exhale to knit the ribs. Using the inhale to open, free the back. That's going to help align your thorax. Then lift up through the back of your head to bring your neck and head into alignment with your thorax. And exhale back toward the middle. In a few moments, we'll move into a guided relaxation. And as I mentioned previously in passing, when in doubt with your posture, relax. And that holds true for virtually everybody. It can be really tempting. We learn a postural cue and we overlay that cue on top of tension, and then another cue on top of tension, and we end up with a lot of tension. So learning how to relax and practicing relaxation, I think, is really a lifetime skill, probably more so now than at least any time I can remember. So for most people, reclining is going to be the ticket. It could be on your floor, or your bed, or a sofa. Now it can be comfortable, comforting to keep your knees bent. If that's your choice, then it can be nice to take your feet apart so that your legs can rest into each other. Otherwise, you have to kind of hold your legs in position. Or if you prefer, feel free to stretch your legs out. Begin by feeling the support that's beneath you, supporting your head, your shoulders, your hips, and your legs or feet, supported by the surface. Now inviting awareness to your throat. And there are a lot of muscles in the throat. Scalenes, sternocleidomastoids, platysma, to name just a few. From the underside of your jaw, all the way into your upper chest, relaxing your throat. As you relax your throat, something I talked about on Thursday evening, a little bit on Friday morning's class, relax the contents of your belly. The contents of your belly, your viscera, are by and large your abdominal organs. And it could seem like those organs are not in our conscious control. Well, let's experiment, explore. Going deep down into your lowest belly within your pelvic bowl. Explore what, if anything, does it feel like to relax your abdominal viscera. So for a guided relaxation this session, relaxing your throat and deep in your belly. And we'll take the next few moments quietly to explore what that may feel like in your mind, to relax your body in this way. All right. So if you've closed your eyes, now opening your eyes. And then once your eyes are open, coming up to sitting. All right. So it's half and half. It's our commitment to offer complementary programming. So if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box and I'll get to them. We do have a long leg, so if I don't get to your question, it's that it didn't appear in time. And a couple of quick announcements, one of which our commitment is to offer complimentary classes every week, half and half. So please tell your friends and share widely. If you know anyone who would benefit from mind-body practices, please let them know. We also have our Pay What You Can program. And so if you find that this work is interesting, but times are kind of tight right now financially, as they are for so many people, our monthly subscription is a Pay What You Can offer where you tell us what you can afford right now. In addition, we have pop-up courses, different classes that are then complimentary for people who are monthly subscribers. And today we have a really cool class coming up in just 15 minutes with Kelsey. And Kelsey's going to be teaching a flow on the foam roller, which sounds really interesting. Foam rollers are a really great way to build strength. Also going to be a really nice way to tease apart some of those restrictions that maybe you're getting from a lot of gardening or riding your bike. That's at 10:15, goes till 11. So take any questions. Okay, so the question is about on hands and knees in the cat-cow transitions. And most of our focus, the question is about, I believe, what's going on in the pelvis. And so when you're moving from flexion, which is cat pose, to cow pose, we're wanting most of the movement to come between the shoulder blades, thoracic extension, but there is a little bit of anterior rotation of the pelvis so that there's a little bit of a lumbar curve that comes in, a little bit of a lordosis, a little bit, not too much. That's it. Thank you so much for your time, and we hope to see you again real soon. Till 2 weeks. Yes, in 2 weeks, Colette and I are going to do a Q&A webinar right after this session. Thank you.